Welcome in, everyone. Or, I should really say welcome to you, the planner tuning in today.
Yeah, we know exactly why you're here listening to this.
Exactly. You are, diligently preparing for your professional exam, and you're probably just staring down this absolute mountain of required reading.
It's a lot. It really is.
It is. So today we're actually stepping away from our standard format to offer you a highly customized deep dive into one specific mandatory piece of text.
Right.
It's the article called Special Ethical Considerations for Planners in Private Practice. That's by Carolyn G. Lowe and Rodney L. Arroyo.
And I just want to say, this is a foundational piece of literature. If you're going to understand how the planning profession operates outside of a traditional municipal building, this is basically the roadmap.
Yeah, so our mission for this deep dive is to completely unpack this article, section by section. We're synthesizing the core arguments, the frameworks, all the real-world findings. Because the goal is that when you sit down for that exam, right, you understand the material deeply enough to navigate any question they throw at you without, feeling bogged down by the dense academic phrasing.
Totally. And to give you a sort of 30,000-foot view of where we're heading today, this article investigates a very specific, a really unique ethical tightrope.
A tough one to walk.
Oh, absolutely. It focuses entirely on private planning consultants. These are professionals who are constantly forced to balance three often competing forces.
Let's lay those out for them.
Sure. First, they have the direct demands of the clients who are actually paying their invoices. Second, they have the financial survival of their own consulting firms to worry about.
Got to keep the lights on.
Exactly. And third, they have this overriding ethical duty to the public interest. So Lowe and Arroyo really wanted to figure out how human beings actually manage that precarious balancing act in real life.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the first major section of the text, which basically asks, what do we actually know about private sector planners?
Right, setting the baseline.
Yeah, and the authors point out that planning consulting firms operate a lot like law firms or accounting firms, engineering firms. They bounce back and forth across the public-private divide constantly.
It's a very fluid role.
It is.
Yeah.
One day a firm is working for a massive private developer who's trying to build a huge subdivision, and the very next day they might be hired on retainer to act as the official planning staff for a tiny local government that, just doesn't have the budget for an in-house team.
And that dual role creates a fascinating dynamic, particularly when we introduce a few key economic and business concepts from the text that you, the listener taking the exam, will definitely want to know.
Grab a pen for this part.
Yes. The first concept is specialized knowledge and information asymmetry.
Information asymmetry.
Right. In any consulting relationship, the consultant inherently knows significantly more about the complex world of zoning, land use, municipal code. They know way more than the client does.
So the client has the funding, but the planner holds the code book.
That's a great way to put it.
But, that seems like a normal dynamic for hiring any expert, right? You hire them because they know more. How does that create an actual ethical issue?
Well, it creates the certain mystique around the profession, sure, but this asymmetry also makes it incredibly difficult for the client to judge the actual quality of the planner's work.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. If a developer doesn't know the deep intricacies of local planning law, they have no real way of knowing if their consultant did a brilliant, comprehensive job or just a passable, mediocre one.
Which leads directly into another major concept from the article.
Moral hazard and the principal agent problem.
Okay, let's break that down for the exam. If the client is the principal, right, and the planner is the agent hired to act on their behalf.
Yes. The client has to worry that the planner might prioritize their own interests instead of the project's.
The text mentions a specific term for that, shirking, right?
Exactly, shirking. Because the planner has way more information about what they're actually doing day to day, the client might fear the consultant is, cutting corners on the clock.
Billing for boilerplate code.
Right, or just doing the bare minimum analysis. To combat this, consulting firms have to constantly find ways to signal the high quality and immense value of their work just to maintain trust.
So there's this longer chain of accountability at play here, which is a huge takeaway for you as you study. Private planners are non-public actors, but they are participating heavily in public processes.
Highly involved in public outcome.
Yeah, they're shaping entire communities. But they aren't elected. And they aren't on the municipal payroll directly in the same way a standard public servant is.
It creates a massive gray area.
A huge gray area. If you aren't a public servant but you're doing public work, whose rules do you even follow?
Well, let's look at how the profession tries to wrangle that gray area. And that brings us to professional codes of ethics. This is where the text comparison to other fields becomes totally vital for your exam prep.
Okay, wait out.
Consider the legal profession. The text notes that for a lawyer, their primary overriding obligation is zealously representing their client.
Right, the lawyer's job is to defend the person paying them.
Exactly. Defending a client, even a guilty one, is seen as serving the broader public interest of maintaining a fair justice system. The client fundamentally comes first.
But planners don't have that fair trial equivalent. The person writing the check is not the priority.
What's fascinating here is that crucial distinction. The AICP, the American Institute of Certified Planners, their code of ethics dictates that a planner's primary obligation is expressly and explicitly to the public interest,
Not the client.
not the client paying the bills. And the text emphasizes that the AICP's definition of the public interest is incredibly expansive.
It covers a lot of ground.
It does. It places a massive emphasis on social justice, inclusion, racial and economic integration, and protecting the rights of the disadvantaged.
So if you get an exam question comparing professional codes, that is your anchor point. Planners are uniquely bound to serve the public first, even when it directly conflicts with the goals of the entity actually funding the project.
Absolutely. You also really need to understand the structure of the AICP code as it's outlined in the article. It's divided into different sections, but the core tension lies between Part A and Part B.
Okay, what's Part A?
Part A contains the aspirational principles. These are the ideals, the big picture goals regarding social justice and public participation that planners should always strive for.
But they're guidelines, essentially.
Yeah, you can't technically be charged with misconduct for failing to achieve them perfectly because they are just so broad.
Got it. And Part B?
Part B contains the enforceable rules of conduct. These are the strict, hard rules like avoiding conflicts of interest or not accepting bribes. If you violate Part B, you can literally lose your AICP credential.
Okay, so it's easy to be an ethical champion in a classroom setting, looking at Part A.
Yeah.
But what happens when the aspirational goals of Part A collide with the reality of running a private business?
That is the big question.
The next section of the article explores these actual challenges for planners in private practice. Like, what do you do when the client paying your firm's electricity bill actively wants to bypass a robust public participation process?
The text refers to these situations as predicaments, and the authors use that word very intentionally.
How so?
Well, a problem has a solution. A predicament is a situation where there might be no entirely satisfactory answer. For instance, if a private consultant pushes back too hard against a client's exclusionary behavior, they just get fired.
They lose the contract.
Right.
And losing contracts means you can't make payroll. You can't keep your staff employed.
Furthermore, the clients, not the consultants, dictate the project's budget. The AICP code aspires to incredibly broad, inclusive public participation. But if the client only budgets for the bare legal minimum, say, one single town hall meeting on a random Tuesday night.
The consultant's hands are mostly tied.
Exactly. A private planner cannot realistically force a client to spend tens of thousands of extra dollars on extensive social justice outreach.
There's also the issue that the public interest itself is a highly subjective concept in the real world.
Oh, heavily contested.
Right. A developer might genuinely believe that building a profitable commercial center serves the public interest because it provides local jobs and municipal tax revenue.
Sure, they see the economic benefit.
But then the planner might look at that exact same lot and believe the public interest requires prioritizing affordable housing there. They're going to fundamentally disagree on what the ethical outcome even looks like.
Which is exactly why having a framework to understand these dilemmas is so critical for a practitioner.
Yes. Listen closely here. If you are outlining this for your exam, Martin Walsh's 1985 typology is the core framework you will want to mentally highlight.
You definitely need to know walks.
The authors use this extensively to categorize ethical considerations. Walks isn't just organizing rules, he's essentially mapping out a planner's professional anxiety. He divides these ethical judgments into 4 distinct categories based on how frequently they happen and how complex they are.
Let's walk through Watch's map right now. Category 1 is the ethics of everyday behavior.
The everyday stuff.
Right. These are the most common and generally the least ambiguous decisions. This includes basic conflicts of interest, outright bribery, or deciding when to disclose certain information.
So the rules here are pretty clear.
Very clear. Planners generally know what the right thing to do is in these situations, even if executing it is uncomfortable.
Okay, then category 2 moves into the ethics of administrative discretion. This happens when elected officials or zoning codes leave the detailed, nuanced decisions up to the planner's own judgment.
Right, like negotiating a planned unit development
Hmm.
or interpreting a really vaguely written local zoning ordinance.
What's the key takeaway for administrative discretion?
What you need to remember is that administrative discretion inherently creates winners and losers. The planner is using their subjective judgment to make a call that will financially benefit one party over another.
That is a huge burden.
It is, because the guidelines aren't black and white. You're creating policy on the fly, essentially.
Okay, category 3 is the ethics of planning techniques. This is the acknowledgement that no models, no data analyses, and no forecasting techniques are completely value neutral.
This is a subtle but vital point. Walks is showing us that the real ethical danger isn't just obvious stuff like bribery. It's the silent, everyday assumptions we bake into our data models.
Like traffic models.
Exactly. When a planner chooses a specific mathematical model to predict traffic patterns or population growth, that choice contains human assumptions. The ethical obligation here is that planners must make those underlying assumptions totally explicit to the public.
They can't just hide behind the math and pretend it is purely objective science.
Precisely. They have to explain the why behind the data.
And finally, category 4, the ethics of plans and policies. The text frames this as the most complex and challenging area.
Without a doubt.
This is where the planner has to balance their own deeply held personal values, the wildly varying values of the community stakeholders, the explicit goals of the AICP code, and the brutal reality of needing to run a profitable consulting firm.
It is in this fourth category where the most grueling ethical battles are fought. So the natural question is, how do planners actually deal with all this in the real world?
And that brings us to the absolute core of Lowe and Arroyo's study. To really understand their findings, let's do a quick hit on their methodology.
Always good to know how they got the data.
They didn't just hand out multiple-choice surveys to random people. They conducted in-depth qualitative interviews with the owners or equity partners of 10 different planning consulting firms across Michigan, Florida, and New Jersey.
And these weren't rookies either.
No. The average time these firms had been in business was 27 years. They have survived decades of these predicaments.
So the researchers analyzed all those real-world stories from the trenches and mapped them directly onto Watch's 4 categories.
Let's trade some of these real-world anecdotes. Starting with that first category, the ethics of everyday behavior. The planners felt incredibly confident here, right?
They did. For example, Lowe and Arroyo found that a Florida planner went way out of their way to avoid even the mere appearance of a conflict of interest.
Just shutting it down early.
Yeah, if a project looked slightly questionable or had bad optics, they simply refused the job. And there was also a Michigan planner who actually lived in the small town she consulted for.
Oh, that sounds complicated.
It was. Neighbors would constantly approach her at the local diner or the grocery store, trying to use their social capital to chat off the record about ongoing development projects.
So how did she handle it?
Well, navigating that requires a lot of discipline. She would completely shut those conversations down in public and literally force her own neighbors to schedule official appointments at the planning counter.
Wow.
Yeah. Their shield against these everyday ethical breaches is just total uncompromising transparency.
Drawing a hard line at the grocery store makes total sense for everyday interactions. But what happens when we move to category 2, administrative discretion, where the rules themselves are fuzzy and the planner has to make a subjective call?
This is where the financial and social stakes really get higher. One Michigan planner recalled a situation with a national fast food chain.
What happened?
The corporation was bullying the local client, basically demanding a variance for a massive, oversized sign that completely violated the local ordinance. The planner had to step in and urge their own client to hold firm.
Pushing back against the big guys.
Right. They asked the client, do you want good planning advice or do you just want to get pushed around by a big corporation? They held the line, and the corporation eventually backed down and built the smaller sign.
Standing up to a corporation is one thing, but the text points out that sometimes using discretion means standing up to the very public you're supposed to be serving.
Oh, the bar variance story.
Yes. The authors highlight another firm that was reviewing a variance for a popular, non-conforming local bar that wanted to expand. Public opinion was heavily in favor of the bar.
People love their local spots.
Exactly. The township wanted to approve it just to make the residents happy. But the planners looked at the zoning, recognized it was terrible planning practice and officially recommended against the expansion.
And they paid a significant social price for that. The researchers note these planners went to the public meeting and got completely booed and hissed at by the angry crowd.
Booed at a public meeting. That's rough.
Very rough. But ultimately, the Planning Commission respected their professional integrity and followed their recommendation to uphold the master plan. It was incredibly uncomfortable. It risked alienating the township, but it was ethically sound.
What about Category 3, the ethics of planning techniques? Did the planners view their data models and assumptions as a major source of ethical friction?
Surprisingly, the study found this rarely came up in the interviews.
Really?
Yeah, the only notable exception was one planner who discussed the underlying assumptions regarding park acreage.
How many acres per thousand residents, that kind of thing?
Exactly. They felt a strong ethical duty to be transparent about how many acres of open space they were recommending, because that specific ratio is a human assumption that permanently dictates land use policy.
Right, it's not a law of nature.
No, it's a choice. But overall, analyzing the ethics of data techniques was just not top of mind for these private practitioners.
Which brings us to Category 4.
Yeah.
Plans and policies, the ultimate gray area. So what does this all mean when a client wants to act unethically?
Right, when the planner is caught right in the middle.
How do they reconcile their duty to the public interest with their duty to their business?
The text presents two highly contrasting case studies of how planners navigate this. And for the exam, it is vital to understand both approaches as they represent fundamentally different interpretations of the exact same ethical code.
We'll present these impartially. Approach number 1 could be called the long game.
The long game.
There was a planner in New Jersey working for a municipality that was actively resisting building affordable housing. The town essentially told the planner to just do the bare legal minimum to keep the state regulators off their backs.
Now, the planner themselves was a huge advocate for affordable housing, so this directive was a direct conflict with their personal values and the AICP Code's emphasis on social justice.
So what did they do?
Instead of quitting, they stayed on the project. They did the minimum required, but over a period of 2 long years, they slowly, incrementally worked to educate the town officials and shift their perspective.
2 years of pushing from the inside.
Yes. And eventually, they successfully guided the client to authorize an affordable housing plan with actual enforcement mechanisms. They compromised their immediate ethical ideals to achieve a long-term ethical victory.
Okay, now contrast that New Jersey story with approach number 2. Let's call it the walkout.
A very different strategy.
Very. A planner in Michigan had a client, a seasonal community, that intentionally scheduled its public meetings during the dead of winter.
Wow.
They explicitly did not want to notify their seasonal homeowners, who made up the majority of the tax base, about upcoming zoning changes. They wanted to pass things entirely under the radar.
Which is a blatant violation of the AICP's mandate for meaningful, inclusive public participation?
Absolutely. The planner tried to convince them to hold the meetings at an appropriate time. But when the community refused, the planner didn't play the long game. They dramatically walked off the job right in the middle of the project and returned the money the town had already paid them.
They drew a hard line.
They did. 2 very different reactions to the ethics of plans and policies. Both planners believed they were acting ethically, but they navigated the predicament in opposite directions. One compromised to educate, the other refused to participate in bad faith.
And as we move into the final section of the text, Lowe and Arroyo explore the broader implications of all this for theory and practice. What did these 10 firm owners ultimately reveal about the state of the industry?
One of the most significant findings, and this is the key phrase, is that planners view private practice fundamentally as a trust business.
The trust business. Acting ethically isn't just about avoiding punishment from the AICP. It is their primary economic asset.
The reputation.
Right. As one owner stated, their reputation is literally all they have to sell. If a firm gets a reputation for being unethical or easily manipulated, they lose the trust of the municipalities they rely on, and their business collapses.
It sounds like ethical behavior is just a survival mechanism. But the study also revealed a pretty dark side to this competitive landscape.
It did.
You would assume their biggest ethical headaches come from villainous clients demanding bad things. But the research shows the biggest threat these owners felt was actually from competing planning firms.
This is a major insight. Multiple firm owners complained bitterly about competitors who act unethically just to steal business. They described a practice where a competitor will under-hustle them.
Under-hustle. What does that mean in this context?
It means a competing firm will approach a potential client and promise they can do the job faster and significantly cheaper by completely bypassing the ethical requirements for extensive public engagement or rigorous environmental analysis.
Oh, I see. One Florida planner expressed immense frustration at losing clients to competing firms that are, in their words, a little more accessible ethically.
Yeah, it creates a dangerous race to the bottom.
Totally. The ethical firm gets financially punished for insisting on doing the job right, while the unethical firm gets rewarded with the contract.
Because of this dynamic, Lowe and Arroyo conclude the article with a major call to action. They argue that the American Planning Association needs to step up and adapt.
What's their proposed solution?
Currently, most ethics training assumes a public sector perspective, where the planner's paycheck is basically guaranteed by the city. The authors propose that the APA must develop specific case study-based training tailored exclusively to the unique financial and competitive pressures of private practice.
They need training that acknowledges the reality of having to make payroll while trying to uphold the public interest.
Exactly.
So as you head back to your exam prep, keep this core tension at the absolute front of your mind. The private planner's relentless tightrope walk between generating firm profit, satisfying the paying client, and serving the AICP's mandate for the public interest.
You now have a really comprehensive breakdown of Lowe and Arroyo's findings. You understand information asymmetry, the crucial differences between Part A and Part B of the Ethics Code, Watch's 4 categories, and how real planners navigate the brutal realities of the trust business.
You've got this.
But before we leave you, consider one final provocative thought to mull over. It builds directly on Watch's 3rd category, the ethics of planning techniques, but looks toward the future of the profession.
Let's hear it.
This entire document focuses heavily on how human consultants navigate transparency and data assumptions with their human clients. But as private firms increasingly look to cut overhead costs by relying on proprietary black box AI tools and automated urban modeling, a massive new predicament emerges.
How so?
Well, how does a private planner uphold their strict AICP obligation to transparently explain their analytical assumptions to the public when even the planner themselves might not fully understand the hidden variables buried deep within an AI algorithm?
Wow. That is a heavy concept to carry forward. Definitely something to think about. Keep studying, trust your preparation, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.